160. He's gone.
The MV Agusta Brutale, when you want to look at the Ducatisti and call them peasants. What's up, guys? Today we are going to be reviewing this 2004 MV Agusta Brutale 750S. And I recently acquired this bike, and I'll be honest with you, I'm totally enamored with it. So to get us started, let's kick off the walk around. Alright, so now that you guys have seen what this bike looks like, you're going to have to understand what I'm talking about. It is gorgeous. There is literally not a bad angle on this bike. It is one of the things the Italians do exceptionally well, and that is design a beautiful bike. Everything about it is so brutish, so massive. The front end is so heavy. The tank splits out wide like the hood of a hissing cobra. And you have that sharp tail, and when you sit on it, right, you don't really see the bike when you sit on it, but you get a very similar feeling because the bike ends, I mean, immediately in front of you and immediately behind you. It's even compared to my old Speed Triple, this bike is notoriously short. Alright, so I'm in second gear, and if we can, I would like to do a pull. Yeah, here we go. Please don't merge on the tollway. Please don't merge on the tollway. Listen to this, guys. I mean, just listen to that noise. The MV Agusta Brutale. Psychosis on two wheels. Let's talk about ergonomics now that we're merging onto the highway. The ergonomics on this bike look like they would be extraordinarily painful. It looks like one of those bikes that's like all the other Italian super sports, where you're gonna just sit on it and it's gonna feel like you're sitting on a brick. But the truth is, the bike is actually extremely comfortable. Even though the handlebars appear to be hard mounted, there's very little vibration that gets passed to the rider through the handlebars. The seat, it feels like you're sitting down in the bike, and while the seat is extremely firm, it almost feels like normally a seat will change its shape to fit your butt. This seat seems to change my butt to fit its shape. And you know, after you've been riding for a little bit, you don't even notice it anymore. It feels very, very comfortable. It's almost like it's scalloped out to fit you perfectly. Well, that's scary. This back seat part fell off, and thankfully it was being clipped in. Yeah, I know this bike looks like it revs to about 17,000 RPM, but it really redlines at 13,000. I don't know why the gauge goes that far, but it does. And before the seat flew off on the highway, I was talking about how awesomely comfortable this bike is, and to be honest with you, the rider triangle on it is really pretty excellent. You know, I have good reach down, but I don't have a lot of weight on my wrists, and at the same time my back is slightly angled forward a little bit in the attack position without being full-on cruiser, but at the same time it's still extremely comfortable. So the rear sets are at a good position for my feet. My legs are a little bit tight, but there's a lot of space on the side of the gas tank underneath those outriggers, and so you have plenty of space for your legs, so you never really feel too cramped. So let's go on and jump into all the technical stuff. So this bike has a 750cc inline 4, 4 valves, overhead cams, Drives a 6-speed manual transmission with a hydraulic clutch. Single-sided rear swing arm, standard sports bike tires on both ends. The front is a Marzocchi inverted forks. The rear is a Sachs shock. Everything is adjustable. Just normal standard sports bike fare. But I will say this, a lot of people online bitch about the suspension on this bike, but I found that when it's set up correctly like it is right now for my weight, it's firm, but it's not punishing. It actually does a really good job of dampening and absorbing impacts going down the highway. And this thing is just there's not really a buzzy RPM on this bike. It just seems to transmit very little vibration through the handlebars, regardless of what engine speed you have. The MV Agusta Brutale. Yes, we should. I just love that, because like, look at this shit. That's really not supposed to do that. My biggest thing with this, so to be honest with everybody, this is the first Italian super sport I've ever owned, and believe me, even though it's a 750, it's still a super sport. But the thing that's confusing is the Japanese bikes, the German bikes, and even the American bikes to some extent are built to a specific purpose. And I always try to evaluate the motorcycles against what they were designed to do. You know, I take a dirt bike off-road, but I take a street bike on the street, because that is what they were bred to do. This bike, it's not really clear as to what the objective was. It's almost like the Italians said, we're gonna build an awesome motorcycle, and then that was the target goal, and that's what they did. They didn't, you know, could you use this as a track bike? Sure, but why wouldn't you just buy the fully faired F4? Does this make a good street cruiser? Sort of, but it gets super duper hot, and it gets super duper hot. And while it is mostly comfortable, it's definitely not the most streetable bike I've ever ridden. It's not real happy under 5,000 RPM. And it's almost like its identity is, I'm awesome, love me. So in terms of performance, this bike is basically equivalent to about a Gixxer 750. About the same power, about the same speed. However, this bike is electronically limited to 155 miles an hour with the stock tune. This bike's been retuned, but it's not really a major talking point anyway. Here, the power plant, it's like it was almost designed just for the noise that it makes. The gauge cluster is pretty advanced, considering it was an 04. It's got a cajillion billion lights on it. It's got a kickstand light. It's got a low beam light, which is what you see on right now. There's a secondary high beam light. You control the main cluster through the starter button by holding it. It's got this weird integrated system that you wouldn't see until probably the late 2000s. The only note of ergonomics I don't like on this bike is the fact that the turn signals are right here underneath the horn. And I've already hit the horn a couple times in my ride trying to use turn signals. So that's not that clever. The brakes are excellent, both front and rear. I think you got dual 6-piston Nissan brakes up front that are specific to this bike. Probably a 2 or a 4-piston in the back. 320 mil rotors up front, a 200 or a 220 mil rotor in the back. If you notice, you have both hydraulic brakes, which is normal, and a hydraulic clutch. Now, this hydraulic clutch is bizarre, because at the same time, it's both the heaviest and the lightest clutch. Like this right here, that's your clutch right there. All of this down here is just dead space, but holding it down here requires a lot of effort. It is a really, really heavy clutch. So it's kind of bizarre why they have a hydraulic clutch that's also heavy. Because generally a hydraulic clutch is installed to help the rider overcome the strength of the springs, but You know, it's just another one of those Italian things. And I mean, you have the steel trellis frame, it's extraordinarily rigid, and everything about this bike is just, it feels big and heavy until you get it moving. And it is by far at its happiest when you're moving. It loves the clutchless up and down shifts. I mean, it just clicks right through them. The back end always feels planted. I mean, when you hit this thing in full throttle, I mean, it definitely pulls on your arms, but the seat is designed in such a way that you're sitting down in it and you can actually just tuck, even though I know that there's obviously nothing to tuck into, but you kind of tuck and the bike just kind of holds you in place. Now, the bike is not without its weirdnesses. We already talked about the clutch. The back seat apparently likes to fly off at speed, which isn't great. The stock ECU usually melts itself into an early grave, so they released an updated unit that you have to replace. It's called the Black SPU, and it will not melt itself into obliteration. So this bike has had that done. That's a big thing. A lot of people don't like the ride for some reason. I think the ride on this bike is phenomenal. I've been riding around for probably 45 minutes now without any fatigue. It's hard for me to sum up this bike because it doesn't really fill any obvious niche that I can think of, and it's hard for me to grade it against something when I don't really understand what its purpose in life is, other than to put a giant smile on my face. And that's what this bike does more than I think anything since the Speed Triple. You know, it's not as fast as a modern 1050 Triple, but in a lot of ways it's more rewarding to ride. The only thing is that clutch. That clutch is fucking weird, like you just saw. But other than that, and obviously a higher cost of maintenance and parts are impossible to find and blah 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 blah, all the normal Italian superbike stuff. So real world value, this bike is actually still about $5,000. This is not a cheap bike to buy. It is not a cheap bike to own, and it is not necessarily a bike that I would really recommend to a lot of people. This is sort of like a better Lamborghini Countach of motorcycles, because you know it's it's only as fast as maybe a Gixxer 750, but at the same time there is no Gixxer 750 that feels like this, that sounds like this, that makes the rider feel like this. It's just that right there, that is exactly what this bike is. This bike is a turbo Lotus Elise. There's no reason for it. It's not practical, but when you have to have something that is uniquely you, when you have to have something that is different, that is brilliantly made in its own way, because let me tell you, everything on this bike feels high quality. Everything on this bike feels like $1 million. When you're at that point in your life where you're like me and you've thrown a leg over probably 100 different motorcycles at a minimum. Ooh, back end broke loose a little bit. So when you've been there and you've seen it all, this is where you end up. And this is not a bike I would recommend to a lot of people. The truth is, you'd be better off with a Gixxer 1000. It's going to cost you less. It's going to be easier to maintain. If you want a naked bike, you can buy a GSXR 1000S. Hell, you could even buy a Speed Triple, and it's going to be more powerful than this. It's going to be probably a little bit more comfortable, I would say. It's still going to give you some uniqueness, some dead sexiness, has a great noise, but it's not this. And I know that that's a stupid fucking explanation, but this bike, you have to ride to appreciate, and not everybody that rides it is going to appreciate it. And you really need to be an advanced rider to get on this. And that's not to say this bike is hard to handle. It's not. You can throw a pretty novice rider on here and they'll be just fine. But to really appreciate what this bike is and how it does what it does, you really have to be at that level. The 2004 MV Agusta Brutale 750S. For the man who knows what he wants and is willing to pay for it. Peace, guys.